So there's a lot online at the moment about attachment theory, attachment disorder, and most of all, attachment styles. What are these things? Well, I explained in a previous video, attachment theory is arising out of the work of John Bowlby, a 1950s psychiatrist, who saw mammalian infants as needing a secure base from which to explore, a primary caregiver to whom they became uniquely, exclusively attached. And that idea makes complete sense, makes complete evolutionary sense. It's demonstrably the case. You can see it in human toddlers, baby elephants, foals, calves. They don't stray too far from mum for very obvious reasons. The problem with attachment theory, as it was developed later by people like Mary Ainsworth and more recently, all the way up to really people like Gabor Mate, celebrity therapists like that, it's been a case of concept creep, really, where it's just gone into the realms of the ridiculous. So the current attachment theory idea goes something like this. Between the ages of 0 and 3, the primary caregiver, usually the mother, is the primary architect of the child's brain. During that period, the child's brain is in a period of critical neurological growth, what they call a critical period or a critical window. And if the mother doesn't get it just right, the neurological wiring and subsequently then the psychological development of that person will be permanently affected. So, for example, if the mother's postnatally depressed or emotionally distant or cold, this will have a psychological legacy because it has a neurological effect, a damaging effect on the brain. This idea is patently ridiculous for the very obvious reason that I gave in the last video, which is that if we reverse that and showed a perfect example of infant and childhood development in which the mother was incredibly attentive and everything went well, and then at the age of 4 or 5 something disastrous happened and you were adopted by sadists, then by the time you're a teenager you're in big trouble, and the secure attachment that you had in those early years would be useless for the precise reason that it's not permanent. So out of this theory have arisen a number of even more ridiculous and risible and mockable ideas, and attachment styles is one of those. So attachment styles is the idea that you develop a certain way of relating as an adolescent and adult because of the attachment style that your mother or primary caregiver had, and that this can result in various different types of attachment style, or the way in which you attach to others. In other words, the way in which you do relationships with others. The positive one, the healthy one, being secure attachment. So having had a wonderfully idyllic upbringing, you are now whole and complete, and your brain is properly wired up, and you have secure attachments with other people, which means you don't get insecure, you don't get overly confident, you are just having normal, healthy relationship with other people. But the two attachment styles that I really want to focus on are the two most common ones that are discussed: the avoidant attachment style and the anxious attachment style. So they are what they sound like. The avoidant attachment style is a person who, when the relationship gets difficult or that needs to be discussed, so they run in the opposite direction, right? And they can't handle intimacy, and they avoid close connection or close, strong attachments. And the anxious type would be the one who's seeking to have more intimacy or a better quality relationship and is permanently insecure about that fact. Often unsure of where they sit, perhaps treading on eggshells around people, perhaps demanding more of this or that. So my obvious and somewhat facetious reflection on that idea is, are we, I mean, this is obviously supposed to be facetious and somewhat cheeky, but are we not describing here, largely speaking, gender differences? I mean, it's the obvious point to raise. Of course, there are men who exhibit the attachment, the anxious attachment style. We all know those, but in general, I would say both the allure of the whole idea of attachment theory itself and attachment styles is generally speaking, a very feminine obsession. It's the perennial obsession of a lot of women, quite rightly so as well, because it should be their prerogative to be obsessed with how they relate to others, given their natural biological predisposition. But it is famously the perennial obsession of many adult women. Maturing girls and adult women are obsessed with the minutiae of their relationships and talk about it to each other and want to inspect it and put it under the microscope. And men want to talk about their relationships about as much as they want to cut off their big toe. In other words, not much. So it is the classic gender clash, isn't it? She wants to talk about where this relationship is going, and he wants to head out of the door. As soon as he hears those words, he now suddenly needs to go out. I mean, we laugh about it. It is such a classic prototype. Now, of course, there are exceptions. There are women who are emotionally distant and emotionally unavailable and bounce from relationship to relationship and seem incredibly secure and don't really want intimacy. And of course, there are men who are incredibly insecure and clingy, so the anxious type is kind of clingy and looking for more, and the avoidant type is kind of has a cavalier attitude and doesn't want to talk about it. So the obvious observation is that these would fit really well in general with gender differences, right? And I think that even those exceptions that we spoke of could quite easily be explained by evolutionary concepts again. Men who are insecure in the relationship, you could suggest that there's something like, what's the term I'm looking for? It's in layman's terms, he's punching. He's punching above his weight. There is actually an evolutionary psychology term for it. I think it's called something like mate discrepancy or something like that. So the idea that he's a 6 and she's a 9, basically. Now, obviously, in that scenario, he would be the anxious one and he would have an anxious attachment style, right? So again, any disparity, that was it, mate disparity, the mate disparity problem or something like that is called. So if there is a massive disparity, he's much, much older than her. One of them is much better looking than the other. Now, of course, people jump up now and say, oh, that's so shallow, that's so terrible, how can you say something like that? That's part of the problem here, is that people just don't acknowledge the fact that such realities exist. Evolutionary psychologists on the whole do tend to, as opposed to developmental counseling type psychologists. So in the therapy field, there is an allergy to looking at painful realities like this that evolutionary psychologists and real scientists don't tend to suffer from. So clearly, there is bargaining power within human relationships, and that includes romantic relationships. I'm not saying that there should be, or this is the case in every relationship, or that there aren't a huge amount of genuine feeling and emotion and pure motivations involved in romantic relationships and all other human relationships, because of course there are. It doesn't mean that all human relationships are only a negotiation, but obviously and demonstrably mating and partnering up comes with estimation and evaluations and judgment calls about the worth of the mate relative to oneself. And if there's a huge disparity in that, then of course it will cause anxious attachment style in the one who has the lower bargaining power. So that's the one obvious point to make. The other point might be obviously inherited personality traits. I mean, people's traits are famously fairly stable through life. I mean, you can improve things you're weak at. You can smooth off rough edges. You can work hard at changing. But in general, anyone who's had a lot of kids will tell you you can spot their personalities pretty early on, and it's remarkable how you can still spot that same personality trait 37 years later, right? And some people are just more anxious and hypervigilant and insecure by nature than others, and other people are more cavalier, more bold than others. And of course, one's life experiences can add to that or detract from that either way. You know, someone with a lot of natural confidence could have some of that confidence knocked out of them, and somebody who is a born nervous type, an overthinker, can learn to become more decisive and tolerate uncertainty depending on their life experiences. Not so much from the parenting style, I would suggest, but from their life experiences, which is a different environmental influence. So you've got that to consider. So these attachment styles, that to me, it's just another relationship astrology. It doesn't surprise me at all that they're really, really popular. The reason for that is internet culture, social contagion, the fact that anything that purports to give you a guiding light through a perennial problem is always going to be popular. I mean, the reason why we do astrological readings is almost always because we don't know what to do. And anybody showing you what to do or how to proceed in a place or a time where you're very unsure and uncertain is going to have value and might be taken up. And you know, the internet, the platforms that are available now for disseminating quick, sort of ridiculously shallow concepts, because I'm quite sure John Bowlby would not have approved of most of these videos on YouTube about attachment styles. I don't think he would think that that was a truthful rendition of the ideas he was trying to put forward. And as I've said, I don't even agree really with his central idea, but many of his ideas were sensible and well thought through and a helpful development in the Freudian line of thinking. But attachment styles is not one of them. It's relationship astrology, it's PAP, it's just too simple and straightforward and doesn't accord to the reality of how humans relate.